everybody. So today we want to talk about the 10 steps of claiming your financial power. These are real basic steps, and I want to give you a little bit of an understanding of why I think these steps are so important. So there was a woman, Susan Reagan, who was actually a domestic violence victim. She had been mute for 5 years and had just recently found her voice when I met her. She told her story of how she became mute a month after she had pursued her MBA. Well, having worked with Spark and learned a little bit about rape and crisis victims, I knew that something must have been going on there, because one of the things that happens in a domestic violence situation is that when women start to assert themselves, either in terms of wanting to learn more about money, or wanting to get a job, or wanting to pursue further education, oftentimes the perpetrator will become even more aggressive. Well, so I asked her about that, and she finally did admit that she was a victim. And when I asked her why she didn't leave, she said something really very interesting. She actually was a successful businesswoman, and she had her own income. She had access to her own health insurance, yet he managed the money in their household. And when it came to even her own health insurance, she didn't use her own health insurance. She was on his policy. And she said, I don't know where to start. I don't even know how to manage money or how to get myself on the health insurance. And it was just so sad to me. I think that, this whole problem of not feeling like I can control my own money has put women into precarious situations. So we look at situations where women can't even control what's happening to themselves, or even what they hear about themselves, because they haven't really gained control over their money, is really concerning. Susan is one of the women who was motivated to start a program. She actually did finally leave him, and coincidentally, her voice is back, and that makes us very happy. But along the way, we've met a lot of other women who have had difficulty. And when we helped them, it was great. So, for example, Janet was a woman who was having problems with her student loans and her credit cards. And we finally put a program together where she started getting them all organized. And she was actually out of debt in almost no time. Another woman who was having trouble, Pat, came to us, and they were going through a process of preparing for retirement, and there was an annuity. And we worked with her to convince her husband that we needed to make sure there was a survivorship aspect to the annuity, that she would get a continued income stream if something should happen to him. And sure enough, something did happen to him, and she was fine having that money. And then there are women all over the country who are getting involved in these giving circles. We have a bunch of them here in Sarasota, and they might not know a lot about money, but they know they have a certain amount, and they know that they want it to go to a great cause. And this is a time where women can find meaning and purpose and joy in their own lives by gaining control over money. So I just wanted to put this kind of continuum up here to, kind of suggest or ask, where are you on that continuum? We want to move everybody closer to the right. It's been shown, there's empirical evidence that has been shown, not only does gaining control over your own finances give you more control over how you use money as a tool in your life, but it also has rippling effect in your overall well-being. And so that's really the objective of this entire program, is to get more women engaged, help you feel more confident in the choices that you're making, helping to have you live your best life. One of the things that I want to mention, however, if some of you have gone to the industry in the past to get some financial guidance, we have seen that, unfortunately, it is a male-dominated industry. Only around 20% of certified financial planners are women, and even less, 10 to 15% of all financial advisors are women. And so what that does, it does create an environment where unfortunately, there are usually aggressive sales techniques. Sometimes you and your needs are not always well heard, and that creates a problem. It doesn't create an effective discussion. And so we want to get past that and get you to a point where you feel confident and comfortable asking questions. One of my friends wrote a book on how women communicate around money versus how men communicate about money. And she found that women and men communicate very differently. Where we like to be much more collaborative. We like to spend a lot more time in groups having discussions. We want to connect more. And our real intention around money is around security. It's not just about building a big pile of money. So this is where we want to focus when we start talking about the choices and the decisions that you make. But the whole end goal is to create an environment where you're living life on your own terms, you're living your best life, and money is just the tool to help you get there. So in that context, I've put together this kind of a list of the top 10 things that people need to do to claim their financial power. This is not just for women, it's for anybody, but specifically want to get everybody on the same page. Last month, when I was talking about some of the things that we were going to pursue, I actually put a slide up of two people in the middle of the ocean and sharks going all around them, and they were busy looking out past the sharks and saying, oh, there's a problem, there's pirates coming miles away. And I'm afraid that a lot of people approach their financial questions and their decisions that way, where they're so interested in looking at those things that are way over yonder and aren't immediately in front of them. So we want to make sure that we approach our decisions in the order of importance, and that we go through each of these top 10 points sequentially. They're in an order that if the earlier items have not been done, it creates problems for the later items. So let's go through that. The first item is, first of all, understanding what your goals are, what your needs are, what your wants are, what your wishes are. And you should understand the big wishes, maybe the ones that you don't think that you could attain, but you really would like to, as well as those that are really what's going to make your life a better life. It really starts by looking at your overall values. And when we work with clients, we really want to spend a lot of time on understanding you, on understanding how you define your best life, because we all define it differently. We all want different things out of our life. And so the choices that we make around money may be a little different because of that. Remember, it's not just the technical aspects of money. It's also what we want to achieve to make ourselves more secure, more happy. So this is an exercise that at some point we may want to actually have a workshop on really defining those financial goals that you have in mind. And they start with your values. They also start with understanding your beliefs around money, because they can get in the way as well. After we identify where we want to go, and it's just like anything else, you want to go on a trip, you want to make a decision, you always want to identify first, where do I want to be? We now want to start looking at how we can possibly get there. And one of the primary tools is making sure that we have some money available. And that is where we're talking about specifically saving. we want to start saving. And we don't necessarily want to start investing yet. We want to make sure first that we have some reasonable emergency savings. So there's this whole argument and discussion around, am I saving or am I investing? And what exactly is the difference? And I know I've been asked what the difference is at many times when people find out that they had been in a risky, aggressive portfolio, and the market has not been doing well, and they now need that money to fund a purchase of a home. And these are for short-term types of expenditures. They are about, do you need the money right now, living expense, or within the next couple of years? And also, do you have enough in an emergency savings? Do you have enough money available that if something goes wrong, you lose your job, your car breaks down, or something happens, that you're not going to be reaching for your credit card, that you have some savings that you can access? That's very different than investing. Investing is more about the long term. What do you need to invest for the future? And so we want to be very, very clear on what we're trying to do. So the idea about savings and making that a priority is really important. We want that emergency savings, and we want to understand what compound interest can do for us, because compound interest is very important. And the reason why I want you to understand compound interest, even in the context of savings, you may say to me, oh, but we're in a bank account. How can we possibly think about compound interest? I want you to understand what compound interest is in a banking account, as well as in long-term investments. Compound interest is something that a lot of people seem to struggle with. When we do the financial literacy quizzes, everybody seems to have a lot of trouble on that. I actually created a little example with my Excel spreadsheet, and hopefully you'll understand what I'm doing here. But the idea of compound interest is that, let's say you start out with $1,000. And let's say that you are getting a 6% return on that $1,000. Well, in the after the first year, in the second year, you will have $1,000 plus $60 that you made from that initial $1,000. Hope you're with me. Okay, so what happens in the third year? Well, in the third year, the $1,000 that you initially put in makes $60. But guess what? The $60 also makes a return. And so now the $60 stays intact, but it also produces an extra $3.60. And then in the fourth year, even that $3.60 also makes interest. And on we go. And you can see that if I created this spreadsheet for 10, 20 years, it would start like really just proliferating. Money is making interest upon interest. That's the beauty of compound interest. Now, I want you to notice something in this diagram that a lot of people don't really get. The second year, the third year, okay, we're getting some interest, but is this really going to change my life? No, it's not. It's not that big of a deal that you made interest upon interest. But now look at the 5 year. And if you saw after 10 years, that's when it starts really making a difference. So for money that's in a short-term type of investment, don't worry so much about whether it's making interest upon interest. It's not such a big deal for you. You need that money. You need that money available for you when, in fact, the purchase or the incident occurs. So you want it available in a readily available account, like a bank account. Don't take that money and put it into a long-term investment that will potentially create risk for you. It's just not worth it. And so that's the idea with compound interest, is that it's a beautiful thing over the long run. When we're investing for the long run, it's not as beneficial for the short run. And we certainly don't want to take the risk, if we don't need to, in our short run money. Okay, so after talking about saving, and only after talking about saving, do I want to talk about getting out of debt. And the reason why is that if I talk to you about getting out of debt first, and I got you encouraged to get out of debt, the minute something happened, you would go to your emergency savings, which was not there. And so you'd take out your credit card again. And I want to stop that spiral of going back to credit, because credit is it's actually evil. It creates a lot of problems. So this is an example. Let's say that you went to the store, or you saw something online these days, and there was a sale, and you said, I want to buy whatever it is, that pocketbook or that sofa. And it was initially, $5,000 or $6,000, and it's now 50% off. And so I'm going to buy it even though I don't have the money, and I'm going to pull out my credit card. And most people don't realize this, but if you've had that credit card for any period of time, some of you might have some come-on rates for the first year, but most credit cards have APR, annual percentage return, of a minimum of 18%. A lot of them have even higher rates. So let's say you take that $3,000, you put it on your credit card, and you pay the minimum amount, $50 a month. Well, it's going to take you 14 years to pay that off. And you're going to wind up paying $4,100 in interest, well more than what you actually saved from getting that bargain, get that sale. Now, okay, you're in a credit problem already. You already have debt. What if you could just pay off the debt a little bit quicker? What if instead of $50, you could pay the debt off every month with an extra $10, $60? You would literally half the amount of time that it would take to pay off that debt, and you would almost half the amount of interest that you're paying. So it really does pay to try to pay off the most debt you can as quickly as possible. Now, if you have multiple credit cards, we always try to encourage people to create some kind of tactic or strategy. A lot of people would say, pay off the maximum APR, the credit card that is charging you the maximum APR. Sometimes that's the right answer, but I usually like to talk to the person that is in debt and get an understanding of, why did we get into this problem in the first place, and what kind of behavioral issues are getting in our way, and how can I motivate or get you motivated to paying off this debt? So sometimes instead of paying off that credit card with the highest debt, we'll encourage people to pay off the smallest credit card first. Make a list, put it on your refrigerator, and pay off the smallest credit card first. And what that does psychologically for us, it gives us some wins. We can start crossing off the debt as we go along. It's called the debt snowball. I think actually Dave Ramsey is a big proponent of that debt snowball. And so, it depends, do we need to create something that motivates us? What I'm most concerned about is that you get out of that debt as quickly as possible, because it just is going to ravage your overall financial situation if you don't. Okay, so we identified where we want to go. We're saving, we're out of debt. Beautiful, beautiful. Now we want to talk about getting a better understanding of where our money is going. And that requires putting together a spending plan. Some people know that as a budget. I don't like the word budget. To me, that sounds too much like a diet, which I don't like either. It sounds about restriction. I'm going to restrict you. I'm going to tell you you can't do things. That's not the idea with a spending plan. The real idea of a spending plan is identifying where your money is going in the context of your values, your goals, your wants, your wishes, your needs. If you decide that your money is best spent on Starbucks coffee every day, then by all means, go out and spend your money on Starbucks coffee. But we all know that we have a limited amount of money that we will be given throughout our lifetime to spend and to use. And so we want to be able to be very conscious about our choices. And that's why the spending plan becomes so important. And everybody that I've ever had do a spending plan, they've sat back and said, wow, I didn't know I was spending that much on X. And that X is not even that important to me. I need to do something to change that. So it's a really great exercise. A lot of people don't like spending plans because they never really execute them properly. First of all, you can't leave a lot of big things out. I mean, having a spending plan with this big category that says miscellaneous, that's not going to work so well. You really have to try to understand it's more about the exercise of identifying and understanding how your spending is going. At the same time, you don't want to make it so complicated. I mean, a dollar goes to this and no, you want to be somewhat, get to that right level of complexity so that it can help you make the right decisions. Some people don't like spending plans because when it comes down to it and we talk to them, they didn't actually do it. And the thing about spending plans is that the first time you do it, it's not going to feel so comfortable. You're not going to feel like you really understand what's going on as well. It's something that you do over time. You practice it. And the more you practice creating a spending plan and understanding where your money's going, the better of a handle, the more control you're going to get over your overall finances. So again, really simple tool, something that people don't necessarily want to address because it doesn't sound like it's going to make such a big difference. But it's all these little things that make such a difference. I'm going to tell you right now, I have seen people, factory workers, people that maybe you would not consider somebody that would be affluent, walk into my office with $1 million portfolio. And it's because they have this kind of discipline. They understand their spending. They understand what's important to them in terms of their values. They understand the difference between saving and investing, and they've stayed clear of debt. And so I just want to tell you that these first 4 steps, as non-glamorous as they might seem, are really, really important. So I want you to consider them. The next step is something that I guess I just have a little bit of a bee in my bonnet, if you will, about, and that is something when I talk to women and they come to me and they start asking me financial questions, and they don't even really know what they have or where is it. It's very, very frustrating because how can you possibly give guidance or make good decisions if you don't know what you have? So understanding not just your net worth, but the components of your net worth is really important. So net worth is actually a formula. It is the total things that you own, all of your assets. That's what we call assets are the things that you own. Okay, so all of those, where are they? How are they valued? How are they titled, especially when you're involved with other people, whether it be a spouse or partners, how are they titled? Really, really important. And also, who are the beneficiaries on that? Take a look at that. I can't tell you how many people I've met that maybe a woman's divorced and she has assets and the beneficiaries are still listed as her ex-spouse. it's really important to keep a handle and understand how those assets are organized and how they're structured. The second side of the equation is liabilities. Okay, so what do I owe? And understanding what all of the money that you owe, whether it be more short-term debt, long-term debt, a mortgage, understanding the rates that are associated with that. Sometimes there are things that can be done with your overall debt, but you want to understand what that is. You want to understand, is there a penalty for paying off any of this debt early? What could I do to potentially move forward? And sometimes when it comes to should I invest or should I pay off debt, the right answer is let's pay off some of the debt first. Right now, with the way mortgages are, if you are in a low mortgage rate, a lot of people have mortgage rates now that are around 3.5% or so for a mortgage rate. Those are pretty good rates. So I might not necessarily encourage you to pay that off as quickly, unless sometimes there's reasons we want to do that. Whether they are psychological reasons, it just makes me feel better, or because we're not necessarily wanting to take the risk with our investments. So sometimes it does make sense, but we want to understand all of that so that we can make good decisions. That net worth number is something that we want to monitor. That's actually a little bit of a report card to us. You know, how are we moving forward? In theory, we want to have enough of a savings by the time we reach retirement, so a positive net worth, that we have some other resources for us in the phase of retirement. So this is a good gauge to actually monitor yourself. There are some rules of thumb in terms of how much net worth you should have at different periods of your life. I'm going to refrain from sharing those with you because I think it really is a very personal type of situation and it depends on a lot of factors. But it's important for you to get a sense of at least moving forward and at least making some progress. The next step that I want to talk about that a lot of people don't always consider when they're talking about their finances, but really is important. So we're doing all this great stuff. We have we're gaining control over our life. And at the end of the day, that's all we can do. We can't control what the stock market is doing or what the Federal Reserve is doing or any of those other things, but we can control ourselves. So this is all about controlling the controllable. And so when we talk about controlling the controllable, there are potential risks in our life that we want to be aware of, and we want to make sure that we have potentially thought about how we're going to handle them. And so usually we look at the idea of risk as the idea that it could potentially cause significant loss and probably even catastrophic loss. This could be a big problem in our life that could potentially completely derail any kind of planning that we've done. And so I have this matrix here. Low severity means it didn't really impact me that much. High severity, of course, this would be devastating to me and my family. Low frequency, probably won't happen, maybe not, never. A high frequency means it happens all the time. And so what generally do we want to do when we look at these different aspects? And we look at the whole idea of something that is low severity and low frequency, your toaster breaking, even maybe your washing machine breaking. We would say, you know what, you don't need to pay the warranty fees on that or get insurance on that. You can fund that. You can support that with your emergency savings. It's really not worth the premium or the warranty costs in order to cover that. We would say to just accept that risk. Now, what if it was a low severity, high frequency item? Well, you know, maybe that's something like a low severity, high frequency. I would think of something like maybe there's a lot of construction in your neighborhood. We know in Sarasota and Lakewood Ranch and the areas here, there's tons of construction. So the potential of us getting a flat tire is pretty, possibly pretty high if we could keep driving down that road where there's all this construction. So what we would suggest in a situation like that is, you know, we don't want to get tire insurance necessarily. Why don't we just try to reduce that risk as great as possible? I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of great examples right now, but hopefully you're getting the gist of this. There's also the high frequency, high severity. It happens often. And when it does, it's catastrophic. And this is the situation that is possibly the most concerning, because the truth is that because it happens often, the insurance companies are not going to insure that. Again, probably a bad example, but the example that I'm thinking of is maybe a smoker getting lung insurance, or, you know, insurance for emphysema or something. Probably not going to happen. Instead, why don't we try to eliminate that risk, avoid that risk altogether, and maybe not smoke? Bad example, but again, hopefully you're getting my what I'm trying to get at. And then the low frequency, high severity. These are the items. For example, the chances that your house will burn down is really 1 in 1,000. It's probably not going to happen. It's possible it could happen. Well, if we get 1,000 people to all pool their money in terms of paying a premium to the insurance company, the insurance company knows that it's probably going to have a claim. One of those 1,000 people is going to have a claim. They make some money off of the premium, so they charge a little bit more than the cost of actually insuring that one person that does get the fire. But this is the idea of insurance. And this is when we want to use insurance. And so oftentimes when we're looking at insurance, we're looking at potentially life insurance. Not everybody needs to have life insurance. There are reasons why you want to have life insurance. And so we want to explore that. There are reasons why you might want to have long-term care insurance. Again, disability insurance. Those types of insurances are really, it depends. Not everybody should have insurance. And sometimes when you go to a financial planner who happens to be an insurance agent, that's what their answer is going to be all the time. It's going to be some kind of policy. And so we want to explore, when does this make sense? And what is the most efficient way to make sure that we have coverage in that area? We, of course, also always need insurance to cover our property like our home and our car. And oftentimes it's not just about protecting that house or that automobile, but it's about also protecting against liability, because we know we live in a litigious society, and we know that liability insurance becomes very important. And sometimes it's fairly inexpensive to get pieces of liability insurance. So there's a whole area to talk about that. That we could potentially explore, but you want to make sure that you have an adequate and the right amounts, and also the right kind of insurance. So finally, we get to a topic that a lot of people think about when they think about finance and doing financial planning. And I'm saying that unless you've done all these other 6 items, you probably shouldn't be even thinking about investing so much. But assuming that you have done all of these items, now let's start talking about investing. And so we want to invest, however, in a responsible fashion. And it does matter where you are in your life cycle. Are you a young person? Are you a little bit older? There are some nuances to all of this in terms of, for example, if you're younger and you work for a company and they have a 401k, and especially if they're matching it, of course you want to start investing it, even if you don't have all of your debt paid down. So there are nuances. I want to just tell you that this is not a recipe for absolutely everybody to do exactly as I say. This is a general recipe, but there will be nuances to all of these depending upon your particular life. But when we talk about investing responsibly, we're talking about a lot of elements of investing that are very, very important. One of the biggest things is really understanding what your overall risk tolerance is. How much risk can you afford to take? How much risk can you actually take psychologically if in fact your portfolio starts getting wobbly? Will you just cash it out and run for the hills? This is really very important, understanding that amount of risk before you move forward. You then want to create an investment program, a plan, a strategy that's consistent with that risk. And so again, this is for long-term money, right? This is for money that you will need in the future, possibly even for retirement. So you want to make sure that it's money that, regardless of what happens, you will be able to stick with the plan. Because it's been shown over and over again that your emotions can have you do the wrong things at the wrong time. I just got off the phone this morning with a gentleman who actually was an executive from Goldman Sachs, who was telling me about what he did prior to the pandemic and during to the pandemic. And I have to just tell you, he did all the wrong things. And he said, yeah, I know about investing and I know about money, but I can't seem to control myself. My behavior, I keep thinking that I'm smarter than the average person. I keep making the wrong choices, the wrong decisions. So, the minute you see something come across your screen on television, you don't want to start reacting to that. You want to make sure you have a strategy that can weather the storm. And that gets into this whole idea of the science behind investing. So there's been a lot of work done on something called modern portfolio theory. This science has been demonstrated and proven to be really the only free lunch that we have in terms of investing, where we're looking to reduce risk for any given level of return. And there are things that you can do by adequately diversifying, by using an asset allocation strategy and rebalancing that will be less risk than if you actually just start investing all in one thing or not having a program that will keep you disciplined. The other thing that we recommend in terms of investing responsibly is that you know what you are invested in. So most people should stay only in the publicly traded sector. So in fact, if you are going to invest in something, you want to make sure that you can go to the internet, you can go to the newspaper, and you can see the value of that particular investment at all times. That means staying away from any kind of private investment schemes. Anything that is being sold or marketed in the private arena, they are not required to disclose what they're doing to the SEC. They oftentimes have a lot of rules in terms of when you can put money in, when you can take money out, and you have no idea really what you're invested in. I mean, Bernie Madoff was just one example of what can happen when you invest in a private scheme. And make no mistake, there are a lot of Bernie Madoffs, and they continue to happen over and over and over again. I have a friend who's an SEC attorney, and she tells me that this continues to be a problem. Unfortunately, it continues to be a problem, especially in the Florida market, because people don't understand what they're investing in, and they don't understand the difference between private investments and public investments. And lastly, you want to understand what you're paying for. Now, there are fees associated with most types of investment programs. And I'm not saying that fees are a bad thing. People have to be compensated. Yeah, but the truth is that Some people overfee, they charge too much. There are things that maybe you don't have to pay as high a fee. You want to understand the fee that you're paying and what you're getting from it. You want to understand the value that's associated with it. So these are the types of things when we're talking about investing responsibly. We're going to talk much more in depth about this in a future webinars and even hopefully workshops, because I'd love to work with you on that. But again, it is all about knowing your strategy. And one of the things that I want to actually mention to you when you talk about investments and people talk about risk, the biggest risk that I think that we all are exposed to is unfortunately longevity risk. So the markets will go up and down, and as long as you're invested in publicly traded, investment grade, high quality investments, they will eventually return. And as long as you have the right time horizon, so forth, you can do well. The biggest risk that I think we have in all of our lives is the idea that we could potentially live a long time. And so this particular graph just shows the probability of somebody who has currently made it to 65 to live into the ages of even, past 100. And so if we just look at the green line, which is women, and we say, okay, a woman who is at 65, maybe she's retiring at the age of 65, she has a 75% probability of living to the age of 81. She has a 50-50 shot at living to the age of 88 and a 25% shot of living to the age of 93. And I want to point out, these numbers are based upon historical, what we've seen in the past. It's not projecting the future healthcare technology that we're seeing come out that potentially could actually extend our longevity risk even further. And so what becomes really apparent to me and what scares the bejesus out of me for myself and for my clients is the fact that at 65, we need our money to last potentially 20, 30 years so that we can cover especially our healthcare costs. We don't know how our healthcare is going to be. We don't know what's going to happen to healthcare costs. That really, I think, is one of the most scariest things. So this idea of how money will last, it would be wonderful if we could just all put it under a mattress and just call it a day. But unfortunately, because of inflation, our $1,000 that we have today at the age of 65 in potentially 20 years when we're 85 will buy us $554 worth of goods and services. That's a 3% inflation rate, which has been the long-term inflation rate over the past 100 years. If we live to be 30, it's even less than half. We'll be able to buy less than half of the goods and services that we require. And, I hate to say this too, when we start talking about healthcare costs, that 3% is probably inadequate because healthcare costs have a higher inflation rate attached to them as well. And so this is one of the biggest concerns around the risk of investing. On the other side, volatility in the markets can be very, very difficult to deal with. And so we can have trouble recovering. And this just shows that if an investment goes down by 50%, if you have $100 and you lose 50%, and then you're able to get a 10% return every year, which is really difficult to do, it will take you 20 years to get back to start. So we want to try to protect ourselves from having that level of volatility where we lose so much money. And so I'm going to go through some of this fairly quickly. I actually want to talk more about it, but modern portfolio theory helps us deal with this volatility. This is what this science has taught us. Historically, people looked at investments in just a bubble. So they would look at investment A and they would say, okay, this is the risk return profile of this investment. Should I invest in it or not? And they would look at B in a bubble. They would do the same thing. Instead of looking at the individual investments separately, what modern portfolio theory showed was that if we look at the correlation, the relationship that A and B have to each other, we can create a combined portfolio that has a smoother return. And so that's what we want to do, is we want to select investments that will complement each other and will help us have an overall smoother return. So when we talk about investments and we talk about asset classes, I usually like to try to explain asset classes this way. If you think of sunglasses as a single asset, well, this single asset all behaves in a similar fashion. Now we have orange ones, we have blue ones, we have different kinds of UV, we have, ones that are round, we have all kinds of different sunglasses, but at the end of the day, the sunglasses all have a specific purpose in our lives. So what I'm suggesting is that just like sunglasses, an asset class will be a type of investment group that all have a particular role in your portfolio. They all behave in a similar way. Now, let's say you worked at the farmer's market and you had a booth and you sold sunglasses. And so everything is great. On the beautiful sunny days, people come and they buy your sunglasses and you're able to cover the cost of your booth and even take some money home. But if the weather is like it has been lately in Sarasota, you are now going to have a couple of days where it's not so nice. Maybe it's rainy, and on those rainy days, nobody wants your asset classes, your sunglasses. So what if you actually trade in some of your inventory of sunglasses and instead you added to your inventory umbrellas? So now you have sunglasses for the sunny days and you have umbrellas for the rainy days. That's the idea of having two asset classes that will behave differently during different weather climates. I'm suggesting that instead what we're talking about in the world of investing is that we want to have two different asset classes that behave differently in different economic climates. And so that's kind of the idea behind modern portfolio theory. I think that I could go on and on. There's actually a couple of other items on our list, but I wanted to stop because I do know that we're running a little bit tight on time. And I wanted to ask if there were any questions right now for this particular conversation. Lori, can you help me?
Yeah, we do have one.
Okay.
And it's, what do you think about services like Acorns for starting the investing journey?
Okay. Well, I don't know enough about Acorns to actually tell you too much about pro or con. And because I don't know enough about it, I'm going to reserve my answer to that. But if you'd like, because you've asked, I am going to look into it and I'm going to somehow communicate that information to Lori and the Women's Resource Center, and somehow you can post that. In general, actually in starting the journey, you might actually just want to invest in some kind of target date fund. If you just have a couple $1,000s, whatever, like a Vanguard target date fund. Maybe your horizon isn't, you won't be actually needing your nest egg until maybe 20 years from now or 30 years from now. So you might get a 2040 target date fund or a 2050 target date fund. What I like about those funds, Vanguard, first of all, uses institutional funds, so the fees are very inexpensive for them. And they tend to use really 4 different investments, asset classes for their fund. They use a domestic fund that includes domestic stocks. They use an international fund that includes international stocks. Then they use a domestic fixed income fund and an international fixed income fund. And the way it works is that because your time horizon is way off, 20 or 30 years, they will be more tilted to the equity, the stocks, more aggressive there. And as time goes on, they'll start rotating into more bonds. A great place to start if you don't have a lot of money, but we can talk more about that in the future.
I have two more, Laura. Just
okay. Okay.
What is your opinion about indexed universal life for 65 years old?
I don't know if I can get into that in the time that we have, but in my first gut reaction is, oh, stay away, please. But I would need to know more about your situation and more about the products. I mean, these products that the insurance industry creates, they are not always as much of a guarantee as they try to describe. There are ways for them to get out of some of their commitments. I get very nervous with some of these packaging. But again, I'll get into more explanation on that if you'd like as well. On one of the.
And then I have two questions about long-term care plans. They seem kind of expensive and not much coverage. And who would be a good candidate for long-term insurance?
Yes, and long-term care is another conversation for us to have for sure. It can, I'd like you to understand the difference between long-term care and Medicare and Medicaid and what all those different things cover and what your real exposure is there. Long-term care is expensive, and I want to just tell you that a lot of the long-term care specialists want to sell the Rolls-Royce long-term care policy, and it's not always necessary. Sometimes you just need something to at least take the edge off of it. But there's a couple of things that I usually look for. I look for a couple where one of the spouses is significantly older, so where there's a large age gap. I look for a single person that maybe doesn't have a spouse and maybe doesn't have children to lean on. I look for, excuse me, I look for people that have significant desires with their money. I'm sorry, I'm taking a sip. Excuse me. Where they want their money to go to their heirs or they have a legacy requirement. And absolutely, if somebody has a disabled or special needs child or grandchild where they want that money to go, that's absolutely a big red flag to me to say, we need a long-term care policy.
And I have one more question, but as we're just at 2 o'clock, I did want to remind everybody that we do have one-on-one coaching on Wednesday afternoons. And if you do have a detailed question, you could make an appointment with one of our money counselors. If you just call the center or visit us at mywrc.org, you can set up an appointment. And one more question, Laura, because we are at time. Is there a decent company to work with as to debt consolidation?
Okay, all right. I'm not sure exactly what we mean by get consolidation here. If you're talking about wanting to create a strategy around investments, yeah, there are decent companies. There are kind of three things that I would suggest that you look for in a company. One is that they work strictly 100% of the time as a fee-only advisor. They have agreed to be a fiduciary 100% of the time. And the only way you're going to ever know if they fully agree to that is if they sign a fiduciary oath. Have them sign it. If they have a problem signing it, there's a problem there. Oftentimes, if they're not independent, they are being motivated and driven by the company that they work for or the shareholders. So you want to be careful. You want an independent fee-only fiduciary who will sign a fiduciary oath. The second thing is I would look for competency. I mean, quite frankly, if somebody doesn't have at least a bachelor's in finance, hopefully an MBA or even a PhD, if somebody doesn't have a CFP, which is not a really easy designation to get, you're required to go through some significant coursework, and you need to pass an exam, and the exam, only half the people ever pass it. So and then there's follow-up on it. So you want to make sure that they're competent, because you could have the best, desires to help people as a fiduciary, but if you don't have the competence, you don't even know what's out there. You don't know the plethora of strategies and products and different things. So you want to make sure that, they're working for you 100% as a fiduciary, and you want to make sure that they are competent. The third thing I would say is that you want somebody that is focused on you, your life. I mean, somebody that uses the word client-centered, client-focused, life planning, somebody that really wants to understand what's going on in your life. Because the more they understand the details of your life, the better their advice is going to be for you.
Good. That's it, Laura.
Okay, can I just want to go to my very last slide here, actually. The monitoring. The last three things that I wanted to talk about, and we can talk about it in other items, is especially when you're getting ready to retire, you want to know where your income is going to come from. And that includes understanding Social Security and understanding Medicare and understanding your pension and all those things, and estate planning. And there are some documents that everybody should have in place. You don't have to have a complicated estate plan, and the last thing, very last thing, is you want to stay on top of this. You want to review it, always in the context of your values and your needs and so forth. This is not a sequential 10-step process. This is actually circular process where you should be looking at this every year, at least when major changes happen in your life. Okay?
Well, good, Laura. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer any other questions, and I will follow up on that acorn for you.
Great.
Okay. Bye.